people that I was born from, they're not my family anymore. I changed my name, I changed my last name, so they're in the past, they're history. Come from a very small town, all the way in the northeast, in the middle of the Cibao Valley. There is a tiny little town called San Francisco. And that's where I was born and raised. Everybody knew everybody. And there was absolutely no privacy. And everybody knew what everybody else was doing with their lives.
In many Latin American countries, stigma and shame can hide the truth. Writer Jimmy Lam knows this all too well. Here's the story of the journey he's taken to find acceptance by leaving behind his family, his country, and his culture. Born in the Dominican Republic in 1958, Jimmy grew up during the end of dictator Rafael Trujillo's rule. The UN estimated Trujillo's 31-year-long regime claimed the lives of 50,000 people.
My mother's cousin was married to Trujillo's daughter. That gives you an idea of what kind of family I come from.
This cousin, Porfirio Rubirosa, was an international playboy and Trujillo's hand-picked diplomat. Since Jimmy's parents divorced when he was young, Jimmy was raised by his mother, aunt, and grandmother.
I was born to a very upper middle class, racist, homophobic, Catholic, hypocrite family. Although they were all literate, they could all read and write. Their world was a piece of, the tunnel in which they lived. And nothing that was out of that tunnel was accepted or tolerated or even considered, I would say.
It's when Jimmy's desires strayed outside this tunnel that he and his family started to grow apart.
I was different. I knew it since I was 5 or 6. And everybody thought that I was going to be, one of those eminent, doctors in the country because my mother wanted me to be a doctor.
But Jimmy wasn't like everyone else. While kids his age were playing sports and getting into fights, Jimmy was reading and writing.
At that moment, you realize that there's something inside you that you don't know what it is at that point in your life. You just know that you feel different. It's something that has nothing to do with rationality. It's something that has to do with your emotions. One time, somebody called the house. My mother went to pick up the phone and she said, hello? And the guy says, hello, can I speak to her niece named Irkania? Can I speak to Irkania? And my mother said, oh, she's not here. Who's calling? And the guy said, it's her nephew, Jimmy, but not the faggot one. So the implication was that everybody knew that Jimmy was a faggot, but not that one. He was the stray kid.
As a young boy, Jimmy felt alone. But historians say his experience is part of a larger historical narrative.
Homosexuality was systematically persecuted, silenced, turned invisibilized.
Gabriel Georgi is a professor of gender studies and queer theory at NYU. He says the government often silenced homosexuality by imposing specific gender norms on its citizens. The image of the good soldier, obedient and disciplined, was touted as the ideal man.
Perhaps the defining aspect of this ideal citizenship has to do with manhood, with a very clear and very rigid construction of masculinity.
Georgi says in Latin America, showing weakness or effeminate behavior can make men targets for police, so they were anxious to prove their virility any way they could.
And that is why masculinity has been so systematically tied to violence. There is something inherently violent in the ways in which males have to prove their masculinity.
For this very reason, Jimmy fell victim to bullying.
I was taunted by all my high school years, all through my junior high, I suffer a lot because wherever I went, I will find people that will call me names. And for years and years, I will have to endure people calling me little girl, faggot, queer, you name it. Because most of the kids in my neighborhood, I never saw them, crying or any of that. For them, that was not a man's thing to do. And I didn't do men things. I just did my thing.
The church and the state in the Dominican Republic in those years were almost one same entity, in the sense that the church was the one that fed the people the ideological fascist beliefs of the dictatorship. And all that was based on the manhood and in the preeminence of the macho man personality in society. And being gay was an affront to all of that. People don't rebel to these things because people are brainwashed. And the function of the Catholic Church is to provide the most fertile ground to brainwash people, to let them accept their oppression, to even make them feel good because they are oppressed.
Jimmy says he was also brainwashed. Pushed by his insecurities and pressures from his family, Jimmy began to receive aversion therapy when he was 19.
Psychiatry back in those times thought that with aversion therapy they could cure your homosexuality. And I had two choices to take the treatment. I could either take a vomiting liquid or I could take electricity. But it depended on which one was more powerful. Vomiting didn't really bother me as electricity did. And so for 8 months, I received shocks, electric shocks in my pelvis and inside my arm to cure me for my homosexual desire.
Jimmy endured the electroconvulsive treatments to rid what he called his sickness and a perversion he thought he would suffer for the rest of his life.
I did this to become normal, to be accepted, to be just part of the majority, to please other people, to please my family, so that they were not embarrassed because they had a degenerate in their family.
It was above and beyond me. Nothing that I could do about it. I wouldn't call it an urge, but it was like who I was, really who I was, and who I wanted to be, more than anything else.
When Jimmy turned 24, he stopped getting treatment. That same year, he met his first official boyfriend and finally confronted his mother about his sexuality.
I sat her on my bed, we were talking, she said she wanted coffee. So I went around to make coffee. She stayed sitting on the bed. When I'm coming back in the bedroom with my tray with coffee, she had a book in her hands. She picked up one book from the entire shelf. I must have had 200 books. She picked a book, and inside the book there was a picture of my first boyfriend naked. When she opened the book, the picture fell on her lap. So she takes the picture and reads it and sees the dedication. And there I am standing with the tray with the coffee. And then she turns to me and she says, "What is this?" So I told her, "What do you think it is? I think it's time that we talk. We need to talk about this. Because I don't want to continue with this game that you pretend that you don't know who he is, who am I, what's going on." So I put the tray and told her that I was living with him, that I loved him, etc., etc., etc.
Jimmy's mother had been in denial of her son's homosexuality. But in that apartment, that day, she finally reached her tipping point.
She threw a tantrum. There was a whole drama, telenovela, crying and this and that and the other. She told me that she would do anything to cure me. I said that I had already tried that. Why couldn't I just be like all the other, faggots that pretended that they were not faggots? I was enraged. I was totally enraged For me, it's a matter of decency and integrity. And she couldn't, how can you talk about integrity if you're an immoral person? You have no morals, you're homosexual. I was livid. We didn't speak for months after that.
Eventually, Jimmy left the Dominican Republic and arrived in the US a decade after coming out to his mom.
The idea of coming out that exists in this country is not the same thing. There was no one that was out. Everybody knew that they were fags and that we were queer, but like out and proud and openly about it, nope, none of that.
Georgie says there was an unspoken rule that said as long as you never talked about your sexuality, you were tolerated.
Persecution and silencing was a crucial dimension of the construction of homosexual identities in the region. In family and communities, it will be okay if you even have a partner and if you take your partner to the family dinner, but you don't name that relationship.
In many places in Latin America, the simple act of naming the relationship would have been difficult because there was still no acceptable word for gay in Spanish.
The word was not gay. It was a pervert. That he's a pervert. Everybody says that he's a pervert. So-and-so is a pervert. It was always associated with mental or social perversion or mental illness. It was never positive or even acceptable or tolerated. Unthinkable. Unthinkable.
Georgie says words like gay and coming out were created in the United States. He argues the civil rights movement and American activism paved the way for a gay and lesbian movement.
In Latin America, there was not that tradition. The US at the time was seen as a place where people could live lives that were not necessarily possible in some countries of origin.
In the US, Jimmy has searched for acceptance of his sexuality. He has written critically acclaimed short stories and poems about his troubled past.
La reina del Carmelita. A las 8 en punto sin mancar, me visto con mis mejores galas, no importa si es lunes o domingo, para irme a encontrar la noche. I never knew until I came to this country that many other gay men have been able to survive the deprivation, the discrimination, the isolation, that I was not the first one. Cuando Woodstock se estrenó, yo comprendí que no estaba solo y desde ese instante dejé de ser la reina del Carmelita. Only in America this identity was possible. Only in America it was possible for me to redefine myself openly as a gay writer without shame, without fear, and just be who I was and do what I had to do.
This poem was Jimmy's first attempt to address the political and emotional problems associated with his sexuality. He was inspired by the American writers that came before him.
And in that sense, I am I will always be so very grateful to this nation of Mark Twain and Walt Whitman and James Baldwin. Because I would have never been possible without them before me. And I'm so fucking very grateful. I could have never written anything like that if I wouldn't have been here. Never, ever.
The most significant changes of the ways in which homosexuality has been recognized and publicly discussed in Latin America have been first tied to the debates on AIDS.
Public visibility of homosexuality increased in the US and elsewhere during the 1980s and 90s because of extensive media coverage of the HIV/AIDS epidemic. Today, the movement is spreading to grant marriage equality. Argentina is the first Latin American nation to recognize gay marriage, and several countries like Ecuador and Brazil have recently legalized civil unions for same-sex couples.
This is a moment in which South America is putting together those struggles and pushing them to a new level. But it's long overdue. This should have happened in Latin America, in the US, in Asia, long ago.
After 10 years in America, Jimmy met interior designer Oscar Torres. They dated for 9 years, became engaged, and on March 14th,
now survey 80 seconds, 3, 2.
They received their marriage license from the state of New York.
I sign here.
Yes, please. I have goosebumps. It's been a long journey to get here.
Am I going to sign with a new name or with
Your
the
current name still.
my current?
Still not married, not yet.
Oh, hey, I'm getting too excited. To have this piece of paper in my hand means that I have the most important piece of paper that I could have had in my lifetime. It's just a dream come true. When I came to this country and I understood what the concept of revolving door was, I realized that I myself was part of a revolving door, that my closet had a revolving door, because I was able to come in and out of it in order to survive, in order to be able to become part of the majority at some point. So I thought that because I had gone through the door, I wasn't going to go back in. I say to myself that I am a very proud homosexual and that I am a very legitimate human being the way I am. However, in the back of my mind, there's always the little voice from Trujillo and from my mother, which is sometimes an echo, one or the other, telling me you're a degenerate, which was one of my mother's favorite words. Once you have been receiving shocks, electric shocks, to affect and to cure a behavior that is intrinsic to who you are as a person, that will never really leave you. There are scars in the soul that will never disappear from your soul. There are scars in your body that you can, take care of them with plastic surgery or laser or whatever. But the scars in your soul are forever.
For Jimmy, some of these scars are from his family, a family he has since divorced.
These people are total foreigners. They belong to a different planet. These people have nothing in common with me, except the genetic pool, but that's because I cannot change that. Otherwise, I would have changed that too. Now I changed my name. Now they have nothing to do with me. They can go on with their lives. And I have my new family, which is great.
In New York, Jimmy found something he never imagined. After years caught between two worlds, he finally feels like he's on his way to recovery, and he is home.
I've had a ride. This is an amazing life. I wouldn't change this for nothing in the world. With the pain and the sorrow and the triumph and the success, and I am totally full-blown homosexual and proud. What else can I ask from life?